and if we have 350 million people in a situation of food insecurity, then that is going to have a massive impact on the bigger picture. We're looking at hunger catastrophes in a number of areas across the world, and that is something that we have to come to terms with. We have 60 minutes this morning, or actually at this point we have more like 45 minutes, so I want to get on with it. And I will introduce our distinguished speakers one after another as we go along. I'm looking for concise statements. I'm looking for specific ideas, things that will give governments, international organizations, and businesses something to work with. And let me start with Ann-Beatrice Tvinnereim, Minister of International Development of Norway. And we'll go cut straight to the chase. So, first question, the connection between hunger and security. Second question, you commented yesterday on the importance of smallholders and supporting smallholder farmers. So could you talk to those two things to start us off?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, that's better. First of all, thank you for inviting me. This is an issue very, very close to my heart, and I think it's absolutely essential. It has been for many years, but more crucial than ever. And as you said, we have come to discover the connection between food security and national security. Well, we should have been aware of it for a long time. But I think in our Western countries, we have taken for granted that there are always international logistic lines that will save us somehow when there is a crisis. And I think we have come to discover after the pandemics and now in the current situation in the repercussions of the war that things aren't necessarily that easy. We have to have national preparedness also on food security. I was in Addis Ababa just a few weeks ago in a discussion with agricultural ministers from all over the AU. Agricultural ministers. But you know what they talked about? They said, all of them said, you need to understand that for us, food security is an essential part of national security. And what is a little bit different from previous crisis on food security and this one is that earlier we have had a price crisis. You know, like in 2008, there was a peak in price crisis, which led to social unrest in many cities in the south. We remember that. Now we also have a peak in fertilizer prices, which leads to huge unrest also in the rural population. And that is what is concerning many political leaders in the south. You have farmers that won't be able to put seeds in the ground and make a living, so they are desperate. At the same time, peaking food prices in the cities. Now this is a new constellation. And we just, you know, for me as a donor country, we as international community, we have to work along two lines. First, address the humanitarian needs right now because people are dying from hunger and it will lead to social unrest in the coming months. But second, we need to use this momentum to transform the food systems and the food production systems in order to make the national food systems more resilient to be able to prevent future shocks. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And next up is Ingrid Hofen, who is the Managing Director of GIZ. I think you have to share the microphone, Anne and Ingrid. Ingrid, so the German G7 presidency has actually focused on food security. It pops up in all sorts of places, heads of state and governments, foreign ministers, development ministers. The G7 presidency has put forward something called the Global Alliance on Food Security. Can you tell me a little bit from your perspective as GIZ in the middle of this development business, what is it that you are contributing to the issue of food security and the broader picture?
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is actually the alliance. The purpose is to bring all the major actors in the food and development and climate arena together to really make a difference. Because we have identified if we continue to work in silos, we don't bring together the different objectives into one bigger picture, it may not be to the benefit of people. So first, of course, in operational terms, I think it's really a great cooperation that we see with the United Nations system and the World Bank when it comes to measuring what's happening on the ground, the dashboards that we need to have a clearer picture, what kind of action is most urgently needed. Secondly, we have to make approaches and proposals to countries that are also fit for purpose in the sense that they reply to country-specific needs. And there again, I think that the operational experience from the GIZ in working in the food security system for many, many years in structural terms is being combined with actors in the humanitarian space and the World Bank as a big financing institution that can actually lever then good pilots and good approaches on the ground. And thirdly, I think we really have now to invest not only to deal with the immediate, the food crisis, in a human-centric and humanitarian way, but also look into, as has been said by the ministers, the bigger ecological transformation that is needed for the agricultural system. What we observe in countries, in many countries across the global south, that we have these extreme weather events impacting actually the agriculture and the water scarcity issue. It's becoming more evident day by day. But at the same time, there are also these slow onset events where actually agricultural patterns, what small-scale farmers used to know, are changed dramatically and they lose their livelihoods. And we have to deal with both. And in the third point, we have to make sure that actually in each activity that we now actually foresee in the food security system, that it's also dealing with the climate issues. We have to make communities more climate resilient and have to implement approaches that deal with climate issues at the same time. And vice versa. We shouldn't actually deal with climate issues in the NDCs, in the national adaptation plans, without considering the concrete impact on food systems and food affordability at the country level. So these are the two signs of a very pressing and emerging issue, and that can only be approached at the same time. And this is actually at the core of the Global Alliance, working together, working across silos, making sure that each partner brings in its complementarities, and by doing so we really can deliver best for the countries that are really now in danger.
Thanks very much, Ingrid. Do we have a microphone over there, Matthias? Matthias Banning, Executive Vice President of Bayer, in charge of everything that has to do with sustainability. I know, Matthias, that smallholder farmers are a big issue for you, but I would like to ask the following question of you in particular. That is the crisis we face, the hunger crisis, bad enough for people in Europe, in other parts of the world, to take another look at innovation when it comes to agriculture? What is the role of innovation in agriculture to resolve these issues?
I think now it works. Sorry. Boris, I think first of all, the hunger crisis is bad, and it's going to get worse in 2023. The UN Secretary General spoke about a hunger hurricane. We now know a lot about its intensity, and we also know that it will take a path going through almost all regions in the world. And therefore, I think we need to bring everything to the table we can in order to reduce the pressure. The challenge I'm seeing at the moment is we focus a lot on emergency intervention, but not enough on innovation. So CGIAR, the agriculture research centers, when you look at their budget, it's just one tripwire for me. That's where the future is being invented. I don't see the same investments and excitement that I've seen years before, and we have to change that. When it comes to the types of innovation, I think people are ready to think differently about how business, research, scientists, and also policymakers collaborate, and you see more openness for all kinds of innovation. It starts with a social innovation, enabling female farmers. When we talk about smallholders, it's often about women, and there's a lot we can do here in order to increase the resilience of female farmers. It goes to access to the innovation that we enjoy in most parts of the world for like decades now. Better seeds, access to fertilizers, access to high quality crop protection and not the crop protection of the 1940s. And then it comes to the next stage of innovation at the intersection of biology, chemistry, and artificial intelligence. And when you go a bit further south from here to Kenya, they have now fully approved biotechnology. When you go further west, for example, to Ghana or Nigeria, their biotechnology is now linked to orphan crops, to crops that are relevant for the food systems here in Africa, not necessarily relevant for us in Europe or in the United States. And I think that's a really big step forward. So yes, innovation will play a key role, but it's not just the latest, greatest. It's also access to what has worked in other parts of the world for a long time.
Many thanks, Matthias. We're going to turn to Ute a little bit later because Ute is in charge of the emergency, if I may say so, representing the World Food Programme, Assistant Executive Director. I'd like to go back to Ingrid and Yuan on innovation. Can we reflect on what Matthias has just said?
Well, you gave us the backdrop. We need to scale up productivity and climate-smart technologies for a small-scale farmer. Well, you know, most of the food that's consumed in Africa is produced by small-scale farmers. We tend to forget that. So that's where we need to scale. And we have solutions. We have the, you know, we know a lot about agronomy for a new climate. We need to scale up on seeds and sustainable fertilizers, but we have a lot that can be taken out there to the small-scale farmer. But the thing is, you know, in transforming food system, it's a lot more tailor-making than it is, for example, in the energy sector. And I think maybe that is why there is some hesitance from some actors to actually get in there and, you know, get the means out there to the small-scale farmers, because there are so many producers and they all need tailor-made solutions. So it's harder work, I think, to get that transformation in the food system, but it has to be done. Getting renewable energy out there in order to put up irrigation and cooling systems. And also one more thing that I'd like to mention is investing in the value chains from the small-scale farmer to the local markets. You know, in the past, those of us who have invested in small-scale farming before in productivity have tended to forget that we also need to get the produce out there to the consumers in development countries. Now, maybe the worst thing that we can do is get the productivity up, but see that the foodstuffs is rotting out in the fields or on the way to the market. So we need to invest in the whole value chains from the female small-scale producer to the local city. We know that's another issue in many countries in the world, that the big cities are dependent on foreign import for foodstuffs because there is a disconnect between the rural areas and the food production around the cities and the consumers in the cities. So we need to reform the whole system and make the long value chains, local and regional value chains up and running. And we need to think we need a totally new approach in terms of food systems.
Thank you very much, Anne. Ingrid, would you like to add?
Perhaps very briefly, I would like to add 2 points departing from Anne's observations. The first one is actually, I think we have to take into account how the whole food system is going to change due to climate change and take a 30, 40 years perspective. Sometimes we're simply reacting to the very immediate. But if we want to make the food security systems very climate resilient, what kind of analysis do we need? And this is one of the innovation I think that we have to bring to countries, put them in a position that they know what's going to happen, what kind of crops are still actually doable in 30 years' time, what kind of irrigation systems are affordable at the same time climate friendly. And I think this type of analysis, we call them climate risk analysis, can be translated into immediate adaptation measures, and this is one innovation stream that we are pursuing. The second one is again about working out of silos. When we deal with the food system and its transformation, we should do this in an ecosystem approach, not only considering the agricultural production, but really looking into the landscapes, the water availability, making sure that the whole livelihood is being maintained. Because when you look at those situations that small-scale farmers are facing, or those people that have already left their homes and are being displaced, they depend in a broader sense on the ecosystem that surround them. Of course, arable land is very important, water availability, but beyond of this, the biodiversity is so crucial for the survival of many, many people in the global south, small-scale farmers, women and local communities. So this would be another innovation, getting out of a productivity silo, but really looking into comprehensive approach.
Many thanks, Ingrid. Let me welcome Nisreen Saim, who is chair of the Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change of the UN Secretary General. Very nice to have you here, Nisreen. You're going to comment on all this, but for you to comment, you'll have to listen a little more, perhaps, if that's okay. And I would now like to give the floor to Ute Klamat, Assistant Executive Director of WFP, who will tell us a little bit about the short-term crisis and what WFP is doing.
Good morning. Let me invite you to a reality check. The climate crisis and the climate emergency is a hunger emergency, and I want to share with you the figures. We are talking about 345 million people on the planet in an acute hunger situation. This is very alarming, and Anja said it all. You know, the climate issue, the hunger issue, and the security issue, that's one troika, and we have to address all of that in one. But what we know is now that the climate trigger, the climate extremes are really the main trigger for hunger. And that is very interesting because everyone thinks conflict is the main trigger. No, it's climate. And that is very alarming for us. So we have to integrate all the kind of climate issues into our intervention. I want to share with you 2 facts. Number 1, climate financing is not allocated to fragile settings. What we know is 80% of the climate finance, 80 times more climate financing is getting into non-fragile settings. This is not right. And I think we are talking here about climate financing, but it's not getting to the most vulnerable, number 1. Number 2, a provocative statement also for the colleagues from the private sector. The interesting one, if you crawl into and analyze the climate financing, the private sector is exclusively 120% investing in climate mitigation business models. But what we know is that the global community did not find a business model for climate adaptation investment in fragile settings. So there is literally none. So what I'm saying, the most vulnerable are affected the most by climate extremes. There is no climate financing landing there. And on top of that, it's all public funding. And on top of that, the private sector is just in a way, looking in the wrong direction. And we have to now coming to solutions. Number 1, the kind of blended financing models, private sector de-risking models for the investment in fragile settings. Number 2, the climate adaptation programs, they have to be integrated into our emergency. And just to give you an idea, the World Food Programme is supporting half of the population in Yemen. this is not affordable. We can't manage. So we are forced to do ration cuts. And this is unacceptable in a situation where we are in the here and now. So we have to really find a solution. Ingrid, what you said, breaking down the silos, it's all about the humanitarian, the development domain, the climate domain, and peace. This human development, peace, climate nexus, we have to get that operational. So fighting hunger, fighting climate from both ends, that's the route to go, but with the help of the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Ute. COP27 is a marketplace of ideas, as you can hear. I'm hoping that all of you can hear enough of what is being said here in front. If not, put up your hand. I think our colleagues back in the booth are doing their best to level out any acoustic and audio issues you may have. Ute, I'd like to go back to something you said. You said climate change is the #1 driver of the hunger crisis. And that's interesting because in my mind, conflict was at least as important. And then you add to that the sort of after effects of COVID-19, and you add to that the sort of ripple effects of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. But you would say that climate change is the #1 driver.
That's nicely laid out in the latest OECD DAC fragility report. That's very interesting. You see the triggers, very interesting. Climate overtaking the conflict trigger, but what is also very interesting to see that gender inequality is one trigger really unfortunately catching up. So we have a toxic, Boris, we have a very toxic cocktail. And in some areas, of course, conflict is the main driver, but in some areas, definitely climate is the main driver. Okay. But it's about this toxic cocktail, and that's worrying. So the solution, and Ingrid, you spoke about that, the solution is definitely not focusing on one, and the minister was also talking about that. We need a kind of very holistic concept and really coming together. But I feel, to be very optimistic, I feel there is a lot of effort in the international community to connect the dots. There is this kind of willingness saying, the global food security crisis is really prompting that change that we are trying to come together. There is this willingness, and that makes me very optimistic every morning.
Thank you, Ute. Nisreen, I think you've heard perhaps enough to share some of ideas with us.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here with you. I am very much known to be from the street to the stage, so I'm doing it again, from street to stage. I want to add to my colleague here and what she mentioned. Actually, in many areas, especially in my country, Sudan, climate change is the #1 trigger for conflict itself. So we have this cycle, this series of events that all leads to hunger somehow, but when we go back to the root causes of all of them, it is climate change at the end. So I come from a country where 70% of the population are either farmers or pastorers, and 70% of our agriculture is rain-fed agriculture. So when we don't have rain, then it means that the whole crop will die, the animals will die, we will have a drought, and then we will have a famine. When we have too much rain, then this is a flood. It means that the whole agriculture area will be filled with water. The crop will be also non-doable anymore. And of course, there's a lot of losses and damages comes with the flood. But I mean, with the food thing, it means that not only the season, but 2 other seasons are actually off because they have to wait until the water dry, and then before they actually are able to use the land. So they don't only miss the season, they actually miss 3 seasons in total. I'm not also talking about economical losses, I'm not talking about the infrastructure problem, because we also have what my colleague also on the right mentioned, a problem of the production areas that are not near to the cities. So when we have a flood, for example, and this flood actually overtake the road, then it means that the production areas will be very much isolated from the consumptions area. And I've seen this a lot in Sudan, not only because of floods, but because of the lack of infrastructure. We have an area in Sudan called Abu Jbeha, for example, and it's very famous for mango. There is mango everywhere. And in the mango season, it's more expensive to get an empty box so that you can hold the mango in than to get a full box of mango. At the same time, in Khartoum, which is the capital of Sudan, this box that's actually full of mango costs 70 times more than the actual price there. And why? Because there is no roads, there is no after production development, no added value, no chains, no industry, nothing. And they end up either throwing it in the desert, so they don't go off in the city, or they feed it to the animal. And in both cases, we have 70% after harvest loss. It's the same with the tomato, it's the same with a lot of other products that have a lot of problems. So for me, climate change is the #1 drive for conflict and the #1 drive for hunger. Yet the #2 will be the lack of development, the lack of infrastructure, and the lack of after harvest production series. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen. Matthias, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I want to share something that Joachim from Brown shared with me yesterday, and then I had a look at it because I almost couldn't believe it. Last year at COP26, there was a closing communique, 5,000 words. 2 words did not appear at all, water and agriculture. That was a year ago, and lots of us were there. So it gives us a bit of a flavor of the shift that is happening here in Sharm el-Sheikh. We have a full day, Saturday, devoted to agriculture, a full day Monday devoted to water, and my hope is that we continue that conversation exactly for the reason that you mentioned. But there's one myth I want to also do away with, and that is that the private sector is only investing in mitigation and not in adaptation. Because it pains me. I mean, we have a $2.5 billion R&D budget. That's 3 times the budget of the whole CGIAR organization. So it's a really large budget. And it's all invested in resilience, in reducing carbon emissions, and helping farmers to make money removing carbon out of the atmosphere. So from that vantage point, we invest a lot in that space. But the crucial point is that our innovation is no longer focused on the traditional high-end countries, North America, South America, the European Union, but we design the innovation in a way that immediately can be adopted in other countries. 2 examples. One, short corn. It's a corn that is very short, and the benefit is twofold. One, it withstands extreme weather events, drought, storms. Secondly, it's short, so in conflict zones, people can't hide in the corn. And that's a big problem for rural communities, that perpetrators, aggressors often hide in those fields. So it's a really important innovation that already grows in Africa and will replace the traditional corn production in the next 5 to 10 years. The second example is digital. We see a lot of progress in digital farming, but we now see that that is also adopted at rapid pace in the countries of the global south. Drone technologies in Southeast Asia, and soon in Africa, but also the overall use of satellite images for smallholder farmers. We invested in a company called Apollo Ag that reaches at the moment 165,000 farmers, all with 1 or 2 hectares. And they get access to satellite data, they get recommendations how to deal with extreme weather events, what to plant, what not to plant. They also get access to climate finance and to input finance, because ultimately we have a better prediction of their yield. The outcome of this in Kenya and in Zambia is a yield increase of 250% more yield. These are the examples, and the problem is we need to scale them faster. And the deal could be, we invest in the innovation, we get supported in rolling them out, and we, on the other hand, do not require royalties or any other kind of fees from the farmers in the global south. That could be a way to bring the innovation faster and at scale into those rural communities.
I think Ute had a quick comment
Yes,
on that. Ute?
You know, I still
Hold
you
up the
know,
microphone,
Yes,
Ute.
yes.
Yeah.
You know, I still have that appeal because scaling is one, speed is one, but the translation that the smallholder farmer is really the recipient of this kind of innovation and investment, that's still missing. The translation in terms of that the 80% of the smallholder farmers are really, and listening to Sudan, are really, you know, benefiting from all of that. That's something we have to sort out. Okay. And we had yesterday one kind of slogan: make the smallholder farmers the climate heroes for the planet. But that needs a lot of thinking, because it's not, let's be honest, the smallholder farmers, this is not the kind of interesting investment for you know, the for
I think Matthias will disagree, but
that's good. That's good. That's good that we have this disagreement, because we need that kind of energy to say exactly how can we translate exactly what you're saying into the rural communities in Sudan.
Matthias gets another one finger. And
so
then
one finger, and then I think we have to do away with that. Smallholder farmers are some of the most resilient entrepreneurs in the world. If they don't succeed, they have hunger or they even die. They are super entrepreneurial. Secondly, they are super fast in adapting new technologies. And I can see that around the world. And then thirdly, when you look at the studies of why Asia was successful, it was because there was a dedicated investment in smallholder and family farming. That's the bedrock of the success of most of the Asian economies, be it Korea, be it other economies, Taiwan. We talk about lots of them. And from that vantage point, let's not talk about the smallholders as if they were children.
Okay.
These are grown-ups that nurture lots of communities around the world, are open for innovation. The problem is they don't get access. And sometimes they don't get access because we decide for them that certain innovation should not get to smallholder farmers. And that has to change. We have to open them the full suite of opportunities to innovation that is out there. And we have to put a lot of money behind that, both business, but also, of course, the public sector.
Okay. What I would like to sort of pick up on is innovation again, and innovation happening in places where people don't think it's happening. For example, Africa. Yesterday we had a dinner, MSC sponsored a dinner together with our colleagues here from Cairo, from CCCP, and we talked about innovation that is happening here, and it is happening at levels in some cases that people don't imagine that it's happening or being adopted. But if we look at what you have talked about right now, then that is sort of the situation we face is what is known as a wicked problem, a complex, a supremely complex set of problems, really. And I would like to ask you, Anne, if you would, there's an initiative called LEAF, which I believe Norway is part of. So it seems to me that LEAF, I think, tries to bridge a kind of government-business gap as well. So bringing together actors in these different areas seems to be the sort of be-all and end-all if we want to get a handle on these issues. Can you say something about LEAF? No? Matthias, you know something? I think you're involved as well. I think Norway, the US, and the UK have been involved with LEAF. But we can also move on. I want to make sure if there's questions in the audience that we give people an opportunity to come in. So stick up your hand if you're interested. And you have another point.
I would like to say something, well, not only about LEAF, but on new investment models that can actually reach the small-scale farmers, because I mentioned it initially as well. We have to think very innovatively in terms of business models. if we are to reform the food systems. And I was talking about tailor making. No, the big sort of volume thinking is maybe a little bit outdated in terms of some of the solutions that if we are to get it to the ground and get it to work for the local small-scale farmers. One example is fertilizers, which is currently a huge problem because it's too expensive, not available, and we reducing parts of future crops or the next harvest because there is no access to fertilizer. At the same time, we know that fertilizer is an environmental problem because it's used in the wrong manner and creating pollution. What we see many investors doing now is stepping up on local fertilizers, local production of fertilizers in Africa, for example, where you tailor make it for the soil conditions at the actual spot, so that you don't use too much fertilizer, or you spread it out and it goes to waste into streams, etc. And you get soil improvement for the local farmers where it is. But that takes tailor making. But that's the kind of innovation we need for the future. And we have the same on seeds, obviously. I mean, right now the global food system is reliant on just a few hugely applied seeds for the main crops. Well, that's not going to be the future, as Matthias is saying. We need specialized. We need to get back to the roots and develop and put money and research into developing our traditional crops that were able to withstand climate change and extreme weather events in a different way. So we have to totally shift our mindset in terms of innovation in agriculture. It's tailor making, localization. If I may be as blunt, maybe the opposite of what we have been doing for the last 50 years.
Ingrid, Nisreen, would you like to come in after Ingrid? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. If there are no questions from the floor, so I would like to add perhaps one specific element. You mentioned the multiple crises. Corona, the climate impact, the food price peaks, the energy price peaks. So all these actually impacts on economies, societies, and people and households. And in some cases, we may not be in a situation where actually we can build back those societies in a way, or those communities, that they are resilient for a longer term. We have to accept that due to climate change, we are going to face more fragility, more volatility in production and in the economy. So how do you deal with this? I mean, is this the right thing then to jump in when a crisis emerges through a humanitarian assistance, or wouldn't it be better to strengthen social safety nets at the local and societal level? Social safety nets or social security systems, or shouldn't we more forcefully actually also mobilize the capital and the knowledge from the private insurance sector to make sure that when a crisis, an extreme weather event hits a community, that then through parametric insurance schemes, very quick assistance can be actually rolled out for school feeding, for farmers, so that they don't have to sell their cattle and so forth. So building up a resilient system, I think this is actually the message also of this COP, when it deals with loss and damage. Don't simply be always reacting to a crisis, but really invest in preventive measures, which really pays off. The numbers are so clear. And I think this is also a solution to the food security crisis, not only to think about the narrow system, but really think broadly and making sure that people can survive and that social security system at large are more resilient and really target the poorest of the society. And there again, I think there's wonderful initiatives underway. Many people sitting here on stage are actually participating. And I think this is another system that has to be developed more forcefully in view of the repeating crisis that we are facing. And this is going to be the new normal, that's for sure. I mean, Antonio Guterres has outlined what is ahead of us. And I think we have in parallel in solving the agricultural issues, we have to build up stronger social security system in many, many countries of the global south. I know that developing agencies and also donors have been a little bit hesitant, reluctant, because those systems again are very complex, but we have seen that the humanitarian assistance is really overstretched due to climate change. And unless we now start to really to invest in stronger, robust safety nets on the ground based on what communities need, I think we are going to lose also the food security issue.
Thanks, Ingrid. Nisreen?
I also think I agree with all of them, and I like the debate that what's happening here, because we always have this public-private. They call it public-private partnership, but I call it public-private conflict also, because the UN as a body, they want to do like holistic approach to the situation. The private sector as a sector, they want to do both. So they want to solve problems and also make profit. Somehow, us as an activist, we criminalize making profit at some reason. And I don't think it's wrong. I mean, I think people should be able to grow economically, and that's why we have the entrepreneurship concept. The idea is, at the end, instead of working together and closing the gaps that each of us have, we end by the private sector doing their work, the UN doing their work, the governments doing their work, the NGOs who are not the UN doing their work, and all of them working in silos. So we don't solve the problem, and instead, in many cases, we repeat actually the actions. And at the end, there's a lot of resources wasted, a lot of time, a lot of ideas, and we did not solve the problem. So the only way to actually move on and be able to solve the issues and struggles and the challenges that we are facing is, especially the climate change is a cross-cutting issue, is we come together and find a way to actually solve these problems. In Sudan also, many of the conflicts happen over the harvest season. Why? Because some people decide to go in the easy way, and instead of fighting for agriculture that is not possible in a lot of places anymore due to the extreme heat, due to the lack of fertility in the land because of the hot weather itself, due to the lack of water, whatever, they go to places where they actually made a progress and did a lot of growing things happening, and they just have a fight there so they can take the cash crops and take the harvest and go. And this takes me to another area. No one, like literally no one is ready to invest in an unstable country. No one wants to put their money in a place where a conflict can happen at any moment and then they lose everything. So how risky it is, and how can we minimize this risk to people who want to do business? And he was talking about very nice things. I mean, I was thinking, if it's that good and that easy, why it's not happening? He said $2 billion. Okay, where are these $2 billion? Technologies, where are these technologies? Why are they not reaching the people? And I get it. If I am an investor, I don't want to go to a country like Sudan, where I can wake up the other day and I find that there's a coup and all of the agreements I signed with the government disappeared and my money is there somewhere where I cannot reach it, I cannot reach the people, I cannot reach anything. So I think one of the things that we should also focus around now is the good governance and structure and how to minimize this risk to the investors, to the UN, to the private sector, to the NGOs, and of course working together, because I don't think it's anything we can say here is not solving the problem that she's talking about and a lot of people of my country and other countries are living. So if it is not solving the problem, then it's just a talking. And if we kept talking, then we're not solving anything. So
thank you, Nasreen. We have one gentleman with a question, if you were to keep it short, and then we have another one, keep it very short, and then we'll try and wrap this up.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Lou Verso from the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. Paul Krugman likes to say that a $100 bill doesn't stay long on the sidewalk. And so if our technological solutions really are that great of an idea, and farmers are really that innovative and resilient, and they're not adapting it, I think we need to question ourselves as to whether our innovations really are that appropriate. We finally heard the word that I would have liked to hear much earlier in this conversation. The woman who's representing the youth just said governance. if we look at why our states are fragile and why companies don't invest in fragile states, it all comes down to governance. If we look at how success has happened in the past, Brazil reduced deforestation and ramped back up deforestation all through governance mechanisms. Indonesia has made big changes in how they treat their forests and how they treat their peatlands through governance. If we don't start identifying the fact that we identify conflict as a failure of governance, we say fragility is a failure of governance, we need to start identifying that adaptation and failure to adapt is also a question of governance.
Okay,
Thank you.
lovely. And we have one more over here.
Thank you, Alessandro Cataldo from Ernst & Young.
You have to hold up the microphone.
Quick question for me is the magnitude of the problem that we have ahead of us is massive.
I think you have to hold the microphone really
The
close.
magnitude of the problem that we have ahead of us is massive. The timing is short. I love what you said about we need to collaborate. What is it that we can learn from how we responded to COVID to try and trigger the same level of passion, collaboration, and leadership that helped us pull through another major crisis that we faced? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think we have sort of a hard stop at 11. So if there's somebody who wants to respond very, very briefly, concisely from the panel, is there someone, Nasreen, would you like to take that? And we'll give you the final word, and then I'm going to have John Gans speak on behalf of Rockefeller. Nasreen, keep it short and snappy.
Sure. I think failure is not a problem. It's a learning process. The problem is that we don't admit this fail and we continue doing things. I think they say Einstein, I'm not sure if he said it or not, but he said that it's so stupid to keep repeating the same things and expect different results. So let's change how we do things and maybe we can get a good result and admit our failure until now.
I think that was a very appropriate final thought. Thank you, Nasreen. What I take away from this is it's a complex emergency we're facing. It's probably going to get worse in the short term before it gets better. So the emergency work that WFP is doing will be even more needed next year, and I hope the donors step up, government and private sector, to make that possible. And with that thought, I hand over to John Gans, Vice President of Rockefeller.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for the great panel and discussion. I'll lean in like Boris here. So we just want to say it's great to be here. The Rockefeller Foundation has been around for more than 100 years and has been working on food for 100 years. Our partnership with the Munich Security Council is about 10 months old. It started the week before Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And as a result, it's no surprise that our partnership on food security has been in part about the war in Ukraine. But we know it's rooted in the food crisis is rooted in the climate crisis. It's one of the reasons we have hosted and sponsored this pavilion here, one of the first in the history of COP, a food and agriculture pavilion. It's one of the reasons we're making some big announcements on both grants this week for responding to the food crisis as well as long-term regenerative work to try and prevent crises like this from happening. And it's one of the reasons we want to continue this conversation and keep engaging with all of you. So please get in touch with the Rockefeller Foundation. We have people here this week and next week. Many of our team will be here next week during the food, and they'll all be here at the food pavilion. So we look forward to keeping in touch. We thank everybody for a great discussion, and we thank Boris and the team at Munich Security Conference for another great event. Thank you.